Good afternoon. Welcome to Broadband Breakfast Live Online's holiday party. It is Wednesday, December 23rd. And of course, I get a recording there. I got to turn off one of my streams. There we go. So thank you for joining us. This will be a special and slightly different Broadband Breakfast Live Online event than we normally have. We normally have a panel of experts on a particular topic. Today, we're having a holiday party, and we've invited all of you to join us. We have at least 8 guests who will be speaking to us about different aspects of broadband innovations that they've been involved with over the course of 2020, which has been a very big year for broadband. I'm Drew Clark, editor and publisher of Broadband Breakfast, and sorry for those slight technical difficulties at the start. And again, we're just very happy that each of you can be with us to spend a little bit of time reflecting on some of the innovations that you've been involved with during this year. Let's go ahead and turn it over to our first panelist on the show. And I want to remind everyone that next week, December 30th, we'll have a New Year's party, similar theme, but a little more future oriented in terms of what you plan, predict, hope, or project for 2021. But again, let's go ahead and get started. First up will be Matthew Snyder, who is Managing Director of Business Development at Centratech. So with that, let's go ahead and spotlight you, and I'll turn on your 5-minute clock on. So welcome and thanks for being with us, Matthew.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Drew. Good morning, everybody. And just a big thank you to having us on today for the Broadband Breakfast team. Again, my name's Matthew Snyder, and I'm the broadcasting today from what appears to be not so sunny Portland, Oregon. Good to see you all. I head business development for a startup that we launched in mid-2020 called Centratech, which is a minority-owned social impact venture with the goal of redefining the world of systems integration in the built environment. As you're all aware, the digital divide has brought us broken solutions. They lay the cabling, they said, build the infrastructure, and everyone will have fast and reliable internet access. But that, as you're aware, is not really the case, because in 2020, we have 157 million people in this country who still don't use the internet at the FCC standard of 25 megabits per second download, either because they lack access or affordability. It's not enough to merely close the digital divide. Providing technology for technology's sake is not adequate. This is too narrow of a view. It's about providing a mechanism for both access and adoption of technology. We believe that what we use technology for is as important as having access to it. And that is why we've embraced a new way of thinking, the innovations of 2020, that we call digital advancement. Digital advancement combines both infrastructure and impact to optimize technology to improve standard of living and improve quality of life for underserved communities. We accomplish this by meeting people where they are, in the home. Home is the center point of a person's life. It defines our quality of life and our personal culture. Today's world has shown us just how important the convenience of home can be as the place where we work, live, and play. It's clear to us that home is a powerful place for change, and that's where we focus. Specifically, we are focused in the built environment of multi-dwelling units with respect to affordable housing, senior care facilities, workforce, and public housing. And we partner with leading community development organizations, financial institutions, and other nonprofit entities to help drive greater impact through technology adoption. At the facility level, Centratech enables asset managers to utilize the full value of their private in-building network by providing a modular, best-in-class infrastructure coupled with tailored impact initiatives to drive community impact. We do this in 3 ways. We embed modern broadband infrastructure within the facility to ensure adequate levels of connectivity in each unit that support the present and future applications of what that technology needs to become. We allow property managers to own that network so that they can maintain ownership of that infrastructure, ensure the ability to choose applications based on tenant and manager needs. And it also provides a revenue generating mechanism for them because they can procure wholesale broadband with us or they can lease antenna contracts with respect to like ISPs. Thirdly, we bring superior resident services by providing tools for adoption that bring intentional focus on the level of usage of broadband infrastructure for life-enhancing and life-sustaining activities. To do this at scale, we've created as well the Century Tech Foundation that as a nonprofit entity will design, develop, and execute technology-enabled workforce development strategies that match talent to the opportunity to drive social impact. These can be at the facility level, so they could even be residents within the community, or they could be at the community within a close proximity. To build this inclusive digital economy, we need to invest in the people and places where this rapid technological change is happening. And where others see communities in need, we see communities of promise with unlimited potential for creativity to solve the problems of today and tomorrow. Finally,
Yeah, go ahead, finish the point. I want to ask a question, Matthew.
Yeah, no problem. So the final piece of this is that we have an application of what we call a digital toolbox, which is known as Century Life. And this application contains a suite of tools designed to bring adoption and technology into the home. So think of ways that we have like curated content, flexible payment solutions, health and wellness solutions, as well as sustainability solutions. So we're trying to provide education that is also paired with impact. So how to open a bank account and then have a bank that is in your community area say, hey, we have a special savings rate for you. And that's sort of a layer that goes on with the resident services.
Where are you mostly based, Matthew? What parts of the country does Century Tech serve in terms of these projects?
We are nationwide. I'm based out of Portland, Oregon. We are headquartered in Pennsylvania. That's where our systems integrator is. And we are also headquartered in DC. We have pilot projects going on in New York and Memphis, as well as Pennsylvania at the moment.
Great. Well, wonderful. Thank you so much for that brief explanation of Century Tech. We'll put links to all of these up on the site. Just feel free to send me what you'd like. And with that, we'll ask you to hang on, turn your video off, but hang in the party, and we'll include you at the end. So next up is Brett Glass. Brett is the Chief Poobah, founder, CEO, head of Lariat.net, which is a wireless internet service provider in Laramie, Wyoming. So Brett, over to you.
Good morning, Drew. Thank you for having me. Yes, we're in Laramie, Wyoming. And as you mentioned, we're the world's first wireless broadband provider, or WISP. We've been doing this for more than 28 years now, and we've been bringing broadband to sparsely populated areas of rural Wyoming. This has continued to be a challenge as demands have increased due to COVID. One of the things that we've innovated this year is that we've streamlined methods for contactless installation. We've now learned how to do an installation in which we require very little time indoors, in which we have masks, ventilations, and other things to prevent transmission in either direction of viruses. We've done this in situations, not only individual families' homes, but also multiple dwelling units containing university students, because Laramie is a university town. And so we've now gotten to the point where we can do the entire install with nearly zero risk of spreading infection, and people are very glad of that. And we've been able to get a lot of people online and keep them going during the pandemic. Their kids are home. In many cases, their workplaces are shut down. In some places, they need to quarantine. In some situations, they need to quarantine. And we've been handling all of that. And I guess that's the first thing that we've been forced to innovate in as a result of the pandemic. We've also adopted new radio technologies. You hear a lot from legislators and from regulators about so-called 5G, which is really just sort of an extension of LTE, or long-term evolution. Well, if what they're doing is 5G, then what we're doing is at least 6G. We're implementing millimeter wave lengths with microwave backup, higher power, greater distances, lower latency than fiber optics, and better reliability than fiber because it can't be dug up by a backhoe. Now, initially, due to the pandemic, our shipments from Asia of new equipment were delayed, so we began to manufacture our own gear. and we're now manufacturing our own antennas and other parts that we need, as well as beginning finally to get them, getting shipments from overseas. Also, as people have been crammed into their homes along with students and have been forced to rely on those devices and also to bring in a lot more IoT devices, we've innovated technology to help people manage their networks. Users are discovering that they don't have full control of all the devices on their networks. They can't control when they update and interrupt their video streams or their Zoom meetings. They can't keep a device from hogging their home networks. So we have worked on technology to help them do that. Upstream, we have gone ahead and made sure that no one stream, no one software update can hog their entire connection. Now, some people may argue that this technically violates the so-called net neutrality rules, which may come back as a result of the new administration, but the users are very much in favor of it. They want us to keep doing it because it makes the quality of their service and the quality of their lives better.
Is that opt-in, Brett?
Yes, this is something they can opt out of, but we've had very few people opt out of that technology because it's been working so well for them. It's preventing their iPhone from essentially shutting down their internet when it doesn't update, and they're very glad of that. And finally, we're doing all of this without taking any federal aid. Some broadband providers have adopted business models that depend on government aid or on subsidies. We have accepted none of this. We are doing this all on a grassroots basis and making our business sustainable in the long term. We believe that's really important because you don't want to have your business model rely on aid, which is subject to politics and might come and go. And so we're continuing to do this on a grassroots basis. And while this has sometimes hurt us, in the long run, we think it's beneficial because we know that we're going to be sustainable in the long term no matter what. And that's pretty much it.
Well,
Yes?
Brett, we got 36 seconds left, so I want to ask you a question about, you said you're manufacturing your own equipment. What is that involved, and how has that gone?
Well, there are some things which have to be certified by the FCC before you can deploy them. But there are other parts of a wireless network that you can manufacture yourself. We're manufacturing our own antennas, for example, so that we don't have to worry about getting those shipped from Asia, and then attaching them to certified equipment, which we're allowed to do under the FCC rules. So, where we can, we're innovating in terms of technology. We're doing sophisticated phased array antennas that are giving us better coverage and, again, helping everybody to get better broadband.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, Brett. We'll again invite you to turn your video off and stick around for the rest. We now have up Chris Mitchell and Sean Gonsalves. Chris is Director of Community Broadband Networks, and Sean is Senior Reporter for Community Broadband Networks, both at the Institute for Local Self-Reliance. We got two people on. We'll be able to go for 10 minutes here, but let's go ahead and turn it over to you, Chris, to talk about some of the very innovative things that you've been doing at muninetworks.org.
Yeah, and I wanted to say that if you like that snowman that Brett had behind him, we're going to be building one of those pretty soon. I got to drop off as we're before too long. I won't be able to stick around to the end because we have a massive storm coming through up here, and I have to batten down the hatches. I was planning on 5 minutes, so I hope you'll have some questions for us. And actually, mostly, I'm going to have Sean do the talking. Sean joined my team. I don't think many people haven't yet become acquainted with him on presentations, but Sean Gonsalves is a writer who's been working for us for a little bit, and he dove into what I think is one of the most important pieces of legislation that we've seen in years. It breaks a bunch of barriers. It brings over stuff from the Digital Equity Act, which actually funds the subsidy, which is now going to go into effect if President Trump signs this big bill, the $900 billion bill everyone's watching right now. We'll create a broadband subsidy for the first time for like a significant one for millions of people. So anyway, let me turn it over to Sean to talk a little bit about some legislation that he's been explaining to folks on our behalf.
All right, thanks for having me. Good to be on Broadband Breakfast. And we should also note that, we're publishing this series, and what essentially our approach is, there's a lot to unpack in this bill. It's $100 billion that's being proposed to be appropriated for to build national broadband infrastructure, really.
Sorry, Sean, I didn't set you up properly. It's the Affordable Accessible Internet Act from Representative Clyburn and Senator Klobuchar that we're talking about here.
Right. And I was just going to get into that as well. So this act, so it actually passed in the House under Representative Clyburn's leadership, and is now in the Senate, where it's been languishing essentially, thanks to Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell and his reticence to take up some infrastructure bills. And so there it sits. And according to Representative Clyburn, really the outcome, or whether or not this moves forward or will have any legs, really depends on the outcome of the runoff elections in Georgia. But as I mentioned, this bill has $100 billion in it. Most of it is in the is 80 billion that's being proposed to deploy high-speed broadband infrastructure across the nation, and it really prioritizes higher speeds. And so the bill implicitly acknowledges that the FCC's definition of broadband at 25.3 is as insufficient, as I'm sure everyone here is well aware of. And so it looks to prioritize projects that deliver speeds greater than that, up to 1 gigabyte. In fact, a portion of that 80 billion, 20%, they're proposing to have a competitive bidding process set up nationally, and then one for states as well. 75% on the national scale, 25% on the state scale, and 20% of each of those pots of money is supposed to be dedicated for networks that can deliver gigabit speeds. And so there's a lot in this bill, and that's why we wanted to break it into a series. And we're happy to be collaborating with Broadband Breakfast and co-publishing these, where in fact today we're publishing part 4, which looks at where the bulk of the money is, that 80 billion. So it breaks down where that goes, what's that for, but also points out some areas of questions or exactly how this competitive bidding process will play out should this bill move forward.
Can I jump in with a couple of questions here, Sean?
Sure.
Thank you for highlighting. We're very pleased to be partnering with Muni Networks and to co-publish this series that you put so much effort into, Sean. And obviously, we hope to do more in-depth collaborations in the future on an array of stories. But speaking specifically about this act, this Clyburn-Klobuchar Act, that's passed the House, not in the Senate. Now, people are probably wondering, wait a second, how does this relate to what I've been reading over the last 2 days about the stimulus bill, which I think is passed, but there's now a question about whether it's going to get signed. But that measure, as I understand it, had about $7 billion for broadband. I don't know if you had a chance, either of you, Sean or Chris, to look at that and compare that $7 billion and what's in that $7 billion versus this 80 or 100 billion number you just talked about. But let me just throw that out for you in a couple minutes we have here.
Sure, it's a great question, and I haven't carefully looked at that yet. I do know that in the measure that has passed, there is money in there for the FCC mapping, which is also in the Accessible Affordable Internet for All Act. So, you know, as folks probably recall, when the Data Act was passed, Chairman Pai at that time said that there was no money to implement it. And so with this particular act that we're looking at, the Accessible Affordable Internet for All Act does put money in there for that. The bill that was passed today also has money in there for that. So the way the Accessible Affordable Internet for All Act was written, though, it does, you know, have specific language that says, you know, we don't want to duplicate effort. So of course that would probably go away, but that mapping issue obviously is an extremely important one, because so much funding is based on that mapping, which just about everyone agrees is a bad map. It doesn't give us good information in terms of coverage.
Right, and so the one of the things to note is that this language that's passed, and we're waiting for a president's signature, is appropriates very little money for infrastructure. This is more breaking ground in terms of providing a subsidy of up to $50 per family. It does provide some broadband infrastructure, but focused on tribal lands at $1 billion, which is sorely needed. And it is, frankly, it's exciting in that Congress is recognizing that there is a need for federal action to make sure that connections are affordable, which is something that really hasn't been officially addressed before. But the legislation that Sean was talking about would really break far more barriers, provide more money, and will still be needed. You know, there's been a little bit of a debate. If you watch Larry Irving on Twitter, he and I went back and forth quite a bit yesterday on this as to whether or not we should see this as a big step forward or whether we should see it as a kick in the teeth, because Congress put twice as much money into movie theaters as it did into broadband for the nation. And I think he raises really good points on it. And so, you know, this is something we need leaders to take action on, to do more with. But we're excited that some of the ground that's been broken, and we think that it sets us up well for 2021 to do better.
Well, and I think it's really important to focus on the infrastructure. What just passed was not the big broadband infrastructure bill. That is really more a component of this Accessible, Affordable Internet for All Act. And again, you know, you've kind of highlighted that this is, in your view, Sean, dependent upon the fate of the Senate being controlled by Democrats or Republicans. But I wouldn't want to give up hope just yet, even if it isn't a kind of a slam dunk in Georgia for the Democrats, that infrastructure bill does have a bipartisan amount of support. So while maybe not everything, I certainly think there's very much common ground for infrastructure legislation in a new Congress. Any thoughts on that or other topics relating to this, Sean and Chris?
No, I think it's a good point that you make. And one of the things that, you know, whether, you know, any particular piece of this bill sort of ultimately gets passed. I mean, as you know, there's always this jockeying back and forth or what have you, but it certainly lays out a bold vision and really touches on, you know, a host of areas, not just the building of infrastructure, but there's an acknowledgement of a lot of things, the affordability. There's money in there for digital inclusion, which is really important. One of your previous guests was talking about it's not just about sort of throwing money and technology at people, but there's other barriers that exist in terms of, you know, adoption. And so this bill recognizes all of sort of the spokes on that wheel, and that's why we think it's an important bill, at least in terms of framing how to approach this moving forward on a national scale.
Yeah, and if I could say that, I think one of the reasons I really wanted Sean to spend time on this and to explain what was at stake is because the House, I think, really got it right. They have a lot of money put into things that have never been put in before for urban solutions, in particular, people that have a cable network nearby but couldn't afford it. It recognizes that we need higher speeds, and I'm frankly expecting that there will be an infrastructure bill, but it will not be as good. And so I wanted to make sure that we covered that and that we knew what was at stake in 2020, and whatever we get in 2021, we can compare against it. Now, Drew, I guess the other thing I should say is that uninetworks.org mostly focuses on local policy. We wanted to talk about this because we thought it was really important, but it's been a great year for municipal networks. We've been covering that. Sean just wrote about the Front Range networks, where we see Fort Collins, Estes Park, and Loveland building municipal fiber networks that are very impressive. You know, Chattanooga connected all of the families, like every family in the free and reduced lunch program is getting free internet access for 10 years, high quality internet access. That is going to make such a huge difference. That is something to be really excited about as we move forward. Yeah. There's just a lot of exciting things in terms of new investment, but you know, you can check out muninetworks.org for that, or some of it's going to be on Broadband Breakfast moving forward too. So looking forward to working with you in the new year.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, Sean and Chris, to talk about this series and also what Muni Networks is doing. We know a storm's coming, but if you can hang on the sides, we'd appreciate it. And we'll invite you to turn your video cameras off, and let's open it up for Brian Rathbone and talk about a lead-in, Brian, to broadband mapping and what is going on with broadband mapping. Brian, you are the co-founder and partner of Broadband Catalyst. Tell us a little bit about what Broadband Catalyst is and what your innovation is for 2020.
Well, thank you, Drew, and hello, everybody. Happy holidays from Western North Carolina. Again, my name is Brian Rathbone, and I'm a broadband planner at Broadband Catalysts. I became a broadband planner largely because I bought a house in rural North Carolina about 19 years ago, thinking it had 3 different types of internet access, only to learn that it didn't have any of those when I moved in. And I started my broadband mapping journey in 2010, working with the North Carolina State Broadband Initiative at the ENC Authority. And that was kind of my first introduction to the lack of accurate broadband availability data and what that did to the broadband planning process. So I've been working on mapping the FCC data, public data, for years and using it to the best of our ability. You know, the FCC data, while it overstates coverage, it's actually fairly accurate where it shows areas as unserved. So we've been focusing on that. And a lot of our innovation this year has focused on the needs of other entities and agencies that have come to us looking for some solutions. One of those has been universities and K-12 school districts trying to figure out where their student bodies and faculty are without broadband. So we've been taking that, the student address data, geocoding that, comparing it against the FCC data at 25.3, 25.25, 50.50, and 100.100 to give schools and government leadership a better idea of where they stand from an educational standpoint, with so many folks having to go back and do remote learning. And on the opposite side of that, we've had a lot of interest recently from broadband providers in the private sector who are looking to either apply for grants, use private equity, but a lot of it comes down to figuring out which markets they're able to serve in a sustainable manner. And so we're using a number of different data sets to gauge that. But what we know is that the public data gets us only so far. We use the FCC data, American Community Survey, Measurement Lab speed test data, but there are limitations to all of those data sets. And one of the things that we do in the second step of our broadband planning process is to go and collect our own data. And citizen survey and the business community surveys are a large part of that. We wanted to enhance our survey tool to include an integrated version of a speed test. So we discovered that Measurement Labs had developed a new tool called Piecewise, which is an integrated speed test and survey tool. And it was in some ways a big improvement over what we had developed internally at Broadband Catalyst. And in other ways, it lacked the ability to accurately geolocate the user and collect a nice address for them. So we ended up taking our technology and merging it with the open source Piecewise technology from Measurement Labs to produce something that gives us an accurate location of the user, really nice formatted version of their address. It integrates a speed test, so we get the results from the Measurement Lab speed test, but it also goes to the big data set in the Google Cloud. And so that's kind of where our innovation has been going. I saw a question pop up to talk a little bit about, who Broadband Catalyst is and who our market is. And that's been a big shift. When I worked at the State Broadband Initiative with Jane Smith Patterson, Deborah Watts, Stephanie Jane Edwards, and a number of other really talented professionals, we did the State Broadband Initiative work and planning at the state level. But in 2014, most of us went back to the private sector, and we were approached by government agencies, the Appalachian Regional Commission, EPA, USDA, to do broadband planning work and initiatives. We've been working with the private sector providers to help them apply for grants and create business cases. We've been working with the schools to help them identify where their students are unserved, and with fixed broadband, in a lot of cases, how we can come back in and help them identify wireless providers they can use for temporary hotspots and things along those lines. So for us, a lot of the innovation comes around taking flawed data sets and getting the most out of them, introducing new data sets that have their own sets of flaws, but can be used to provide a counterpoint, say, to the FCC data with the speed test data. And we're just working in a way to help different entities understand how they can take initiatives money, needs that they have, at the research education network level, for example, where research education networks need to deploy new services to provide connectivity to students and teachers. Those are some of the things that we're really passionate about and excited about. And we're putting together a cloud-based broadband data analytics platform that is helping us automate a lot of these processes. They've been manual up until this point and time consuming. So we're looking to automate as many of those things, put them into a web interface. And while there's a lot of maps out there, we're trying to build more of a data analytics platform that facilitates maps. And rather than building a closed silo, we're actually looking to coordinate with others who do broadband mapping to give them access to our data via APIs and coordinate and see how we can help each other, because there's really more work in this field than our group is going to be able to do. We're looking for folks to coordinate with.
Well, thank you, Brian. I have a lot of questions, but we want to keep moving. So stick around if you can. And I hope we'll get to some broadband mapping discussions. Let's go ahead and invite you to turn your video off, and we will invite Kimberly McKinley, Chief Marketing Officer at Utopia Fiber, to join the discussion. You've had a very big year. Kim, tell us a little bit about some of the things happening at Utopia Fiber.
So just to introduce myself, happy holidays, first of all. And my name is Kim McKinley, and I am the Chief Marketing Officer of Utopia Fiber. Just to give you some background of what Utopia Fiber is, we are the largest open access network in the country. And this year was a huge year. We do fiber to the home in 15 cities and business class services in 50 cities. And we are also an operational partner in Idaho Falls. But just before I start about some of the innovations we've done this year, I just want to give some quick stats of how big a year 2020 really was for us. I just got these, we're getting all the stats in. So I just got these stats in of that we placed 1.8 million feet of mainline conduit. That does not include the drop conduit. If we say that we did 10,000 customers this year, that is a growth of 175% from last year. We placed 1.5 million feet of mainline fiber. We added 2 more ISPs this year. We completed 3 cities, Layton, Morgan, and West Point, and we added 2 new cities, which would be Clearfield and West Point. So it was a huge year for Utopia. I think we're all a little tired because of how much we really worked this year. But one initiative that we are all talking about, like, it's not necessarily just about connecting people and teleworking, which is very important for all of us. But one thing that we kind of launched this year was the Utopia Innovation Labs. And the Utopia Innovation Labs is really assisting cities to deploy some of the smart city applications that are out there. One that I'm going to highlight today was the Edwin Project. The Edwin Project was a project that was started from a kind of capstone project at BYU. What it does is it's called the Edwin Project Early Detection Wildfire Imaging Network. So we deploy FLIR cameras that are optical and thermal that are pointing against the mountain to detect, if we can detect wildfires. If we can even give us 30 minutes heads up, the amount of damage that happens is minimized by finding this. So right now we've deployed 4 of those cameras, soon to be our 5th camera down in Orem, Utah, that is just waiting to be installed. But I mean, everybody this year, we've talked about how many fires, like the fires amongst everything were on the news this year. And just in Utah alone, we averaged 1,300 fires a year that destroy over 250,000 acres. So we're using our network to really kind of assist on some of these smart city applications. And that was one that we didn't catch any fires this year on the cameras, but that's a good thing. But hopefully if there is a fire that we can catch it. One interesting story that we heard from a fire chief in one of our cities, Layton, Utah, he said that somebody called in and they said there's a fire on the mountain. Well, what that fire chief was able to do was log into the cameras and zoom in to see if he could see anything. What it turned out to be was just a camper with some lights that they were just using, but somebody had called in, so they didn't have to go out there and roll trucks to see. They could log into the cameras and see it themselves. But it's not, and what we're doing, we some other things that we're doing here is that we deploy more air sensors in the Wasatch Valley than anybody else. We have every air sensor on every hut that we have throughout the Wasatch Valley. So we have really granular data for people to log in to this site and see what the air quality is in their neighborhood, and not just where that one EPA sensor is in Salt Lake City. It goes down to school level. So you can see if it's a good air day for your child to go out and play. In case you're not aware, Utah has some of the worst air quality in the winter here, which is really surprising. Most people are not aware of that.
Yeah, it's the bowl effect, right? And because of that, the inversion happens. And very familiar with it. Kim, let me get you to back up. You've said so much to unpack. We'll have to have you back to talk more about all of these. But just highlight again. You said you've completed. You've done 4 cities: Layton, Morgan, West Point, and Clearfield, and finished 3 of them within the year: Layton, Morgan, West Point. Just talk a little bit about this expansion, right? Because many people may know Utopia to be kind of a consortium of cities along the Wasatch Front in Utah to enable the kind of open access wholesale model that you've really pioneered for America to see how it works. But just speak about the expansion to West Point, Clearfield, other cities, and how you see that kind of evolving in the future, Kim.
Yeah, no, I think this year Utopia didn't expand for many years into new cities, but now we have a model that we feel is it. What we do is we go into a city and we talk to them if they're looking for broadband needs, and what we say to them is, if we can get a certain take rate in your city, UIA, the sister company to Utopia, bonds for that the project. And if we hit that metric, which is usually around 30 to 35% take rate, the subscriber revenue covers the bond payment. So we're going into these new cities with a really successful proven model that it's not gonna cost the city anything to build a fiber to the home network, which I think is a huge benefit for what we're doing here. And we've shown that, like in Morgan, for example, they needed a 35% take rate to make sure their subscriber revenue covered the bond. And I think within 2 months, we had over a 65% take rate. And we just feel like we have a model for success. And right now we have about 20 plus cities in different phases of feasibility studies. And one other thing that I do want to mention is that we are also an operational partner with Idaho Falls, and we help with their network. And I just got the news that they hit their 1,000th customer today. So everybody's growing in municipal broadband, and we have been lucky to see the growth here in Utah.
Well, congratulations on the great progress that you've had over the year and years. Thank you for being with us, and we hope you'll stick around here, but we'll invite you to take your video off, and we'll turn to our penultimate speaker of this session, David Guilford, principal of HR&A Advisors. So tell us a little bit about your innovation of 2020, David.
Great. Thank you, Drew. And as you said, I'm with HR&A Advisors, and I'm joined on the meeting today by my colleague Ariel Benjamin. And together, we're co-founders of the Broadband Equity Partnership, which is a new partnership that we established with CTC Technology and Energy to help cities and other organizations create programs that can increase broadband access and adoption. It's really wonderful to hear these stories today because, as much as 2020 has been a very challenging year, there's also lots of good reasons for hope, and these stories of innovation, I think, are a really big piece of that. And like I'm sure most of you, this year began on a high note. And back in January, after years of working with the New York City Mayor's office, we were celebrating the release of the New York City Internet Master Plan, which was New York City's first blueprint for how to use public assets and private partnerships to connect the literally millions of people in New York City that are on the wrong side of the digital divide, as still nearly 30% of New Yorkers lack home broadband access. But then sort of 2 months later, in March, as the lockdowns began, all of us found that this divide was larger, both in terms of the immediate negative impact, as well as the urgency in solving it. And as multiple speakers have been talking about, federal support is, of course, a critical lever and possible tool in addressing this. And indeed, this week, in the midst of all the challenges, it's great to see some attention for broadband in the COVID relief bill, showing that even when we do have these political divisions, that broadband can be an area with broad potential for bipartisan action. But there's clearly no easy solution. And looking ahead to 2021 and the future infrastructure bills, as we've been speaking about, we at the Broadband Equity Partnership firmly believe that states, cities, and communities themselves are the only ones that really can understand the needs of their residents, as well as the capacities of the local institutions to implement this effectively. Which is why this week, together with my colleagues Danny Fuchs, Ariel, and Joanne Hovis from CTC Technology and Energy, we launched a new survey that we're calling Local Priorities for a National Broadband Stimulus, which is a survey of local governments and nonprofits. And we're looking for input not only on funding priorities, but also understanding the local capacity of different types of organizations, whether it's a school district or a state IT department, as well as the policy changes that are needed to help communities better be able to implement programs. We'll be working with the Benton Institute for Broadband and Society to publish the results of this survey in early 2021. And we hope that this can inform the design of better federal programs, both directly in the Biden-Harris administration as well as in Congress. So this survey is available now at broadbandequity.org, and it'll also be linked to from broadbandbreakfast.com. And we'd welcome any sort of feedback and questions both here, and you can also email survey@broadbandequity.org. So please fill it out, share it with colleagues, and follow us at Broadband Equity on Twitter and LinkedIn. But most of all, I just want to say thank you again to Drew and the whole team and other speakers, because we're really looking forward to a brighter 2021 in collaboration with so many of you. Thank you.
Well, thank you. We really appreciate you coming on and talking about this, and we'll make sure to get the link to broadbandequity.org. Just give us a quick 30 seconds or so, David, about what you are seeing as the emerging priorities for tackling. We had this discussion earlier about sort of some of the innovations of the $7 billion in the stimulus package versus a broader, accessible and affordable Internet for All Act that includes major amounts for infrastructure funding. Are you basically trying to get priorities for the former, that is the targeted, or for the latter, or both?
Really both. And of course, this is a fast-moving field just in terms of even as we've seen in the past 24 hours about what the current status of the COVID relief bill. But I think there's, we look at it both in terms of the sort of some of the acute needs today, and of course some of the increases in funding to help people who've been economically impacted by COVID-19 to get access is certainly going to continue to be a focus. But we're really, I'd say, interested primarily in how some structural changes in funding might better achieve the longer term goals, and that includes thinking about new entrants into markets. Certainly, we believe WISPs have a big role to play in that as well, but also thinking about sort of changes that give communities more control over their broadband future, and that could include changes to rules at the state level in terms of prohibitions against municipal ownership. But also things like the one thing that was hidden in the COVID relief bill that I think is promising is some funding for the NTIA to establish an office dedicated at connecting minority communities that have been historically neglected and disinvested from a broadband perspective. So I think we're seeing great interest so far from the people who've been taking the survey, but it's only been open a couple of days, and between now and mid-January, we want to really dive into what we're seeing from across the nation.
Great. Well, we would definitely want everyone to go there. Thank you for being with us, David. We'll invite you to take your video off, and we'll now turn to our final speaker for 5 minutes, Craig Settles. Craig is a longtime friend and definitely a expert on broadband and various aspects of it. So Craig, let's go ahead and have you speak for 5 minutes, and then we will be entertaining questions from anyone to any of the panelists who are still, or presenters that are still on the link here. So Craig, take it away.
All righty. So if you have a proposal for a federal grant for broadband, telehealth, whatever, from my 20 years of doing marketing for high-tech companies, I believe that you have about 30 seconds, 90 words to touch the grant to make the case for funding and to get the reviewer of your grant application motivated to read the rest of your proposal. For example, we could put up a proposal and say, hey, we want to create a resource center for the library. Would it be better to say, we believe that this project will digitally create a knowledge oasis to offset the ill effects of food deserts that will be put together by our library? Or if the library wants to become a telehealth center, which is a noble project, what we could say is it's going to enable us to create quiet parts of for those people who are dealing with mental health storms. So basically what we're trying to do is we're trying to create something that hasn't been created before, such as creating a priority to give or to transform healthcare in low-income communities. You want to make your statement colorful. You want to make the statement dynamic. Not only are we going to transform healthcare in low-income neighborhoods, but we're going to do it in 2 years or 4 years. But there has a sense of urgency and a dynamic sense for what we're trying to do with this project. The main thing that you're trying to do is you want to get the vision out there that it is going to be inclusive of your community and other people who take an interest in the community. You're going to look at getting the reviewer to become part of the vision, right? So they're not just a passive, here's one more proposal, but how do I get that reviewer to believe that this is one of the best projects there is, and they get an opportunity to fund that, to make that a doable project. And then you also want to have a vision statement that will also encourage potential partners, because if I'm the government, I've given you or we're wanting to give you money, they want to have an insurance that you are going to do everything possible to ensure that success, and making sure that we have partners and stakeholders and so forth that are part of the program, that are part of the vision. That's what we're trying to do. That's the main thing that we're trying to do. And I think that you've seen a bunch of proposals with great intentions, but they are incredibly boring. And you may not think that that's important, right? But you're trying to motivate a person who sees proposal after proposal, day in, day out. You want to make your proposal better.
Greg, who would you describe as the core group of people that can benefit from these reports that you've produced that we'll provide a link to from the page? Who that is potentially considering applying for these grants is the most likely person who needs to see this and understand this?
Well, obviously the person who is tasked with the report. So there's usually one person who has the responsibility for making the project, or to make the proposal good, right? So that you have that group of folks, but then you also have the stakeholders that will be involved with a broadband project, a telehealth project, right? Everyone who has an active role in the effort to make this project happen, those people need to be aware, and that's who really I'm writing to, because all of those folks have a role to play, either preparing information, editing information, and so forth. But if you have all of the people involved in the creation of this vision, you will ultimately have a better, more inclusive, and more dynamic proposal when all is said and done.
Great. Well, thank you, Craig. We'll invite you to turn your video screen off, and we will go ahead and open it up to Q&A. At this point, we'll go ahead and allow anyone, normally we kind of keep our cameras off, but we'll allow anyone who would like to go ahead and turn your camera on and raise a question. Most of our presenters are still here in the audience, so you can kind of do the chat window thing, or just raise your hand if you'd like to go ahead and ask a question for the next 10 minutes of our discussion here. So, Brett, I see you've turned your camera on, so go ahead.
Are you looking for questions or answers?
Well, I was hoping to get people who had questions of you, but do you have anything you'd like to add here to the discussion that different folks have highlighted?
Well, I just wanted, while I'm on camera, I should add something I said in the chat, which is I hope that the new COVID-19 bill, which is now pending, and we don't know all the details of that, it's thousands of pages, it's a monster, will take a different approach to subsidizing broadband. And by the way, I'd be interested in people's reactions to this. From the looks of it, what it may do is something that I think should have been done from the beginning, which is to give the subsidies not to providers who might or might not be worthy and might or might not actually fulfill the requests that are being made of them, but giving it to users and letting the users select the providers and dangle the subsidy in front, dangle the money in front of them if they do the right things and provide good service and deploy to unserved areas.
Let me jump in. That is actually an excellent point, Brad, and I appreciate you making this. You know, we have had multiple discussions on Broadband Breakfast Live Online about the best and most efficient way to distribute government funds for broadband subsidies. And one discussion, we actually had folks say, hey, the model of a reverse auction is actually pretty good because it allows money to go to those who are going to use it most efficiently. But I suppose you are not as supportive of things like RDOF, the Rural Digital Opportunity Fund, or are you? I mean, you're basically saying don't fund providers, fund users who can then fund providers, right?
That is indeed what I'm saying. The problem with an auction is that it has one winner and the rest are losers, so it's picking winners and losers. And even within whatever service area you define for your auction, there may be providers who are better at serving different places or doing different things for customers. Make it market driven. If you let the market determine who will be the actual winner, then you're not intervening in a way that could actually do harm.
Very good. Well, I want to invite Brian Rathbone to turn your camera on here. Again, for these last couple minutes, no need to turn your camera off. Just keep it on. We'll have a little discussion here. Brian, thank you for your presentation. I'm wondering if you have some thoughts on kind of the funding of the digital opportunity data collection. I haven't had a chance to drill into what's happened over the last 24 hours from a perspective of the language, but on the presumption that there's now funding for DODC, the digital opportunity data collection that the FCC has been trying to do for a year and a half now, how will that impact the broadband mapping landscape that you spoke about with us here?
It's going to be interesting, and I haven't fully researched that yet. So I'm coming from a bit of a place where I'm not fully familiar with the new legislation and what that's driving. But what I can say is that a lot of the work that we're doing is asking communities for additional information with regards to their needs and specifically around budgeting. And so I want to take a look at what kind of metrics are being gathered, because when we're trying to work with whether it's the private sector or a county that's looking to attract the private sector, or middle mile providers who want to partner with last mile providers. That's a lot of what we've been doing in looking at these rural areas of how do we make the business case work. And one of the most successful things that we've done in our data collection that I would encourage folks to do at a larger level is to ask people what their budget is in an optional way, so they don't have to provide the information, but especially when it comes to businesses, because some of the rural deployments that we've been able to foster through our research and planning have been driven by the fact that there were multiple businesses in an area that were still using T1s, for example. In Haleyville, Alabama, we did a study where we found 5 different businesses that were spending over $1,000 a month on T1-based internet services. We were able to use those as anchor customers to bring a provider in, private sector provider. Now they can make their business case to bring a fiber backhaul feed in, feed those commercial customers, and then all of the residential customers that we surveyed as well, many of them in rural areas that are unprofitable to serve, we're able to help them make the business case because we're bringing enough money in the, business and urban and dense areas to help cover the cost of going into those rural areas. So
yeah, Brian, you and I have had many conversations over the years, and this gets me super excited because it really is where the mapping comes into getting better broadband to more places. I want to ask David Guilford a question here about your thoughts on the mapping and data collection and how that might relate to this effort you're attempting to do here and that you spoke about.
Yeah, thanks, Drew. Yeah, mapping and data certainly is central to all of this. I think both at sort of the nationwide level, clearly the FCC would benefit from having better data, but from the perspective of an individual community or city, it's hard to even make the argument, whether it's to your own stakeholders within the city, let alone to people in DC, without having a better sense of who is actually being served, what level of sort of choice is there, what are the real challenges. So we do have, as part of the survey, some questions around the prioritization of better data, and expect that will be a theme. It's also something we've seen in New York, where like many cities, when you start looking at the FCC Form 477 data, and you realize the definition of building or a block or being served is so limited in terms of it may not map to the person's actual experience, that it clearly means that the overall severity of the problem is being understated, and that of course is not purely an urban problem. It's not purely a rural problem. It's something across the board. So we're eager to see, both from the survey as well as under the new administration, what level of priority better approaches to mapping and data collection get. But we're certainly grateful for the community-led and private sector-led efforts to source that data, because it is the first step in figuring out how to address the problem.
Okay, great. If Kimberly, if you're still on, I want to ask you a question. Thank you for popping back on. Could you speak to what's the wish list that a provider, an innovative open access provider out in the real America, right? What are some of the things that you would want from Washington as it considers infrastructure legislation, broadband legislation? What are some of the things that make sense, and what are some of the things to not worry about because they could mess things up?
I think that from our perspective with the RDOF funding and whatnot, it was just those funding mechanisms have not been really favorable to open access networks because they are very favorable to providers because of the necessary phone service that has to come along with it. So we actually here at Utopia did the first round of RDOF applications, but then it came back of, well, you don't provide phone service because you're not an end supplier. So we just kind of dropped out. So we just wanted to make it more favorable to all models across the country, whether you are the provider, whether you are the infrastructure, just not regulate to that degree of what we've seen in the past, because we believe this it's infrastructure, and that we are helping the private sector by delivering the infrastructure and letting these 13 providers who offer residential service survive.
Sean, could you make the point you just made in chat there about the Affordable and Accessible Internet for All Act and its take on open access networks? You're muted, so either unmute yourself or maybe I need.
Yep.
There you go. Thank you.
Yep. Without going on to, say that, the bill itself was flawless, a number of the things that folks here are discussing are addressed in that legislation. Like, for example, with the mapping data, one of the things it does is it goes further than what the Data Act required. And so it doesn't look just for better service information, but also pricing information, which is crucial, including additional fees, taxes, that kind of thing. It also requires it also would require the FCC to hold a series of public hearings to really assess how consumers evaluate internet service plans and whether the existing disclosures are available and effective and sufficient and so forth. And then as it relates to open access networks, one of the things that I think that's interesting about this bill is that in the bulk of the funding, it does require that 20% of it be reserved to be, or in terms of funding priority preferences, it does prioritize the funding of open access networks as a priority preference. So it just sort of speaks to, the broad input that I think this bill received from a lot of broadband advocates across the country.
Great. We are rapidly running out of time, but Matthew, I thought you said you'd like to weigh in with a policy point that kind of supplements some of the market points you were making there regarding, and are there two Matthew Snyders? But please go ahead, Matthew.
No, thank you. And it's just something that from the Century Tech perspective, we're also leveraging everything we can in the policy realm to bring the fact that, this access needs to be universal, both from a rural and affordability perspective. And so we're working with communities and organizations right now to develop a recommended set of policies and practices that we're hoping to present and get a larger sign on from a number of agencies. So collectively, this is really great to hear that there's so much advocacy for this. And we look forward to, potentially partnering with a lot of the folks on here to try to help make sure that we get these policies in place and in the bills that are coming.
Well, thank you very much to all of you for being on our program today. As we close out, I just want to remind everyone that we're here every Wednesday at 12 noon Eastern time. We'll be here again next Wednesday, except Inauguration Day. That's one Wednesday we're not going to try to counter program. But want to thank those of you who joined both to present and those who just were part of the show. You can also watch this feed on Broadband Breakfast. It's available right away. Hope everyone has a wonderful holiday season to enjoy the benefits that broadband can provide at this time. And we hope to see you again next week, Wednesday, the 30th, as well as in the new year. And once again, I'm Drew Clark at Broadband Breakfast and encourage you to sign up for our twice weekly newsletter and subscribe to our YouTube channel so you can stay up to speed on all events that we're doing.